There is an unspoken rule written into the history of life on Earth. The deeper you go into the ocean, the more terrifying things become. From ancient seas filled with armored nightmares to modern waters ruled by sharks and leviathans, the ocean has almost always been the worst place to be. Meanwhile, land at least gave you a chance. You could run, you could hide, you could fight back, but there was a time when this rule completely broke, a time when the safest place on the planet was not solid ground but open water, when the oceans were strangely quiet, and the land above was ruled by monsters so efficient at killing that survival itself became a daily miracle. This was not the age of dinosaurs, not even close. This was long before them. At the very end of the Permian period, a world so hostile that even nature itself seemed angry, where the ground burned, the air choked, and the shadows hunted you. In this forgotten chapter of Earth's history, the sea became a refuge and the land became hell. There is almost no point in Earth's history where choosing water over land would improve your odds of survival. Oceans are usually filled with apex predators, extreme pressure, freezing darkness, or crushing depths. Land at least offers familiarity and escape routes, but the late Permian world was different. This period, known as the Lipingian, marked the final chapter of the Permian era, roughly 250 million years ago. Earth during this time barely resembled the planet we know today. Even time itself felt different. The moon orbited closer to Earth, which caused days to be shorter, lasting around 22 hours instead of 24. This faster rotation subtly affected weather patterns, tides, and biological rhythms, making the entire planet feel more unstable. Geography was equally unfamiliar. Nearly all of Earth's land was fused together into a single colossal supercontinent known as Pangaea. Africa, North America, South America, Europe, Antarctica, India, and Australia were all physically connected, forming an almost unbroken landmass that stretched from pole to pole. Only a few large islands existed beyond its grip. To the north, isolated landmasses made up of what is now Siberia, Kazakhstan, and North China formed a massive island-like region. To the south, another island existed, composed of South China and parts of Southeast Asia. Further west, smaller fragments such as modern Turkey, Iran, and Tibet floated between ancient seas. These lands were surrounded by vast bodies of water, including the Tethys Ocean and the Paleotethys, but none of them compared to what lay beyond. To the west of Pangaea stretched Panthalassa, a superocean so massive that it covered over 60% of the planet's surface. It was more than twice the size of the modern Pacific Ocean, an expanse so vast that crossing it would have taken months or even years with no land in sight. An ocean like that sounds terrifying, and normally it would have been, but during the late Permian, Panthalassa and most other oceans were strangely quiet. Marine life was present but weakened. Many of the dominant sea creatures from earlier eras were already gone. The oceans had recently suffered through the Capetanian mass extinction, an event so devastating that it wiped out huge portions of marine biodiversity. Coral reefs collapsed, complex ecosystems vanished, and the survivors were mostly small, simple, or highly specialized sharks. Had existed for over 200 million years by this point, but the true giants were gone. The infamous Helicoprion, with its spiral saw-like teeth, had already disappeared before this time. What remained were smaller relatives, rarely exceeding the length of a modern leopard shark. Their teeth were adapted for soft prey like squid rather than bone-crushing attacks. They were predators but not nightmares. Other shark groups such as hybodonts and samariforms still swam these waters, but they too were relatively small and posed little threat to large animals. Eurypterids, often called sea scorpions, were technically still around, yet they were shadows of their former selves. Once massive apex predators during the Devonian, they were now declining rapidly, with only a few modest species remaining. Trilobites, ammonoids, and nautiloid relatives still drifted through the seas, but their numbers were low and their sizes unimpressive. Entire marine ecosystems felt thin, fragile, and incomplete. The oceans were not thriving, they were barely surviving. This weakness created an unusual imbalance for perhaps one of the only times in Earth's history. The seas were no longer the most dangerous place to exist above. The waves, however, was a completely different story. While marine life struggled to recover from extinction, land animals rebounded quickly, and evolution filled the empty niches with terrifying efficiency. Old rulers fell, new ones rose, and the result was a world where stepping onto land meant entering a hunting ground dominated by hyper-specialized killers. The stage was set for a planet where the ocean offered peace and the continents offered death. When the seas grew quiet, the land did the opposite. Life on Pangaea did not recover gently, it rebounded violently. The Capitanian extinction that weakened marine ecosystems had also struck land animals hard, but instead of creating emptiness, it created opportunity. Entire dominant groups vanished almost overnight, and evolution wasted no time filling the vacuum. Before this collapse, terrestrial ecosystems were ruled by a diverse group of large therapsids, often called dinocephalians. They were massive, slow-moving, and powerful. For millions of years, they shaped food webs across Pangaea. Then suddenly they were gone. Their disappearance left the land without a true top predator. For a brief moment, prey animals may have thrived, but nature does not tolerate imbalance. Into this open niche stepped a lineage that would turn the late Permian into one of the most lethal chapters in Earth's history. The Gorgonopsid. These animals were neither reptiles nor mammals. They belonged to a strange transitional group called therapsids, creatures more closely related to mammals than dinosaurs, but still utterly alien. The first Gorgonopsids appeared earlier in the Permian. At that time they were small predators, some no larger than a human foot. They hunted insects, small reptiles, and early herbivores. They were fast, sharp, and dangerous, but not dominant. Everything changed as the late Permian began. With competitors gone and prey abundant, Gorgonopsids began to grow generation by generation. Their bodies became longer, their limbs stronger, their skulls narrower and deadlier. What truly defined them, however, were their teeth-long, curved saber-like canines erupted from their upper jaws, some growing longer than a human hand. These teeth were not built for crushing bone. They were weapons designed for slicing flesh, opening arteries, and collapsing lungs. For the first time on land, predators had evolved tools capable of killing large animals quickly and efficiently. This was not brute force. This was precision. Gorgonops developed long legs positioned beneath their bodies rather than sprawling to the side. This posture allowed them to move faster and farther without exhaustion. They could pursue prey across open floodplains, dry valleys, and sparse forests. Their skulls were narrow and reinforced, allowing them to absorb violent impacts during attacks. Their jaws opened wide enough to drive those massive canines deep into living tissue. By the height of the late Permian, Gorgonopsids were no longer minor predators. They were the undisputed rulers of the land. The most infamous among them was Inostrancevia. Animal was not just large for its time, it was enormous by any standard. Adult individuals reached lengths exceeding 3.5 meters, weighing over 400 kilograms, comparable to modern bears, but built entirely for killing. Its limbs were long and muscular, allowing it to sprint with terrifying speed. Its chest was deep, its neck strong enough to control struggling prey, but it was the skull that made Inostrancevia truly nightmarish. The upper canines alone reached lengths of 15 centimeters, curved, serrated, and perfectly shaped to cause catastrophic bleeding. Once bitten, escape was unlikely. Even if prey managed to break free, blood loss, shock, and internal damage would finish the job. How exactly Inostrancevia hunted remains debated. Some evidence suggests it targeted the neck, severing vital structures. Others propose a bite-and-release strategy, letting prey collapse minutes later. Either way, survival depended on never being seen. What made this predator even more terrifying was its range. Fossils show Inostrancevia roaming across vast portions of Pangaea, from what is now South Africa to European Russia, from warm floodplains to cold, arid deserts. This adaptability suggests a highly intelligent hunter capable of adjusting its strategy to different environments. Few predators in Earth's history have achieved such dominance, and Inostrancevia was not alone. Across the late Permian, dozens of Gorgonopsid species stalked the land. Smaller, faster forms hunted agile prey, medium-sized species ambushed larger herbivores. Together, they formed a killing network that blanketed entire ecosystems. In some regions, herbivores faced multiple Gorgonopsid species competing for the same prey. Every watering hole, every forest edge, every open plain became a potential death trap. European Russia was especially dangerous. Fossil beds there reveal ecosystems almost completely dominated by gorgonopsids, where nearly every large herbivore species shows evidence of predation. But, as horrifying as this sounds, conditions were even worse in the southern reaches of Permian, what is now South Africa. A specialized group of giant gorgonopsids evolved known as the Rubigenae. These animals were built like tanks with massive skulls reinforced with thick bone. Their teeth were deeply serrated, optimized not just for piercing but for cutting through muscle and hide. With some species approached the size of Inostrancevia, others exceeded it in raw robustness. Rubija atrox, for example, reached lengths of 3 meters, its skull alone accounting for more than 15% of its total body length, a clear sign of immense jaw musculature and biting endurance. Despite their size, their bite force was surprisingly modest, similar to that of a modern wolf, but this was not a weakness. Their killing power came from blade-like teeth and repeated slashing attacks, turning blood loss into an unstoppable weapon. Even more alarming is the possibility that Rubigenae often coexisted with Inostrancevia, sharing the same environments, hunting the same prey. This would have created constant competition, frequent confrontations, and a landscape ruled by multiple apex predators. By this point, the late Permian land was no longer simply dangerous, it was optimized for death. Every step carried risk, every sound meant danger, every shadow could hide a saber-toothed executioner. Compared to this, the quiet oceans began to feel like sanctuary. As terrifying as the gorgonopsids were, they were not alone. The late Permian land was not ruled by a single nightmare. It was ruled by many, while saber-toothed predators dominated the spotlight. Other carnivores evolved alongside them, some smaller, some stranger, some arguably even more unsettling. Among the most important of these were the Therocephalianthus group, emerged earlier in the Permian, at first overshadowed by larger theropsids, but after the collapse of old ecosystems they exploded. In diversity, Theroceans were more compact than gorgonopsids, their bodies shorter, their skulls broader and deeper, their teeth smaller but numerous. At a glance and untrained, I might confuse them for gorgonopsids, but their behavior told a different story. Where gorgonopsids relied on speed and slashing attacks, Therocephalians favored close combat. Many had powerful forelimbs capable of grappling prey. Their jaws closed with precision rather than brute force. They were ambushers, close-range killers, animals built to finish fights quickly. What made Therocephalians especially dangerous was their adaptability. They occupied nearly every environment across Pangaea, from Russia to Africa, from China to Antarctica. Some species remained small, no larger than a dog. Others grew to rival wolves and jaguars. A few became apex predators in their own right. One of the most successful was Muscurhinus. Predator was roughly jaguar-sized, but its skull was enormous, almost lion-like in proportion. Its jaws were filled with sharp conical teeth, perfect for gripping and tearing. Its forelimbs were thick and muscular, likely used to pin prey to the ground. Fossil evidence suggests Muscurhinus was abundant, not rare, not isolated, but widespread in some environments. It may have even rivaled gorgonopsids as the dominant hunter, replacing them entirely in certain regions, and Muscurhinus was only one example. Other Therocephalians experimented with even more extreme strategies. Some species show evidence of semi-aquatic lifestyles, their limbs and skulls suggesting they hunted near rivers, lakes, and floodplains, blurring the line between land and water predators. Others developed elongated saber-like teeth of their own, different in shape from gorgonopsids, but equally lethal. Then there is the most disturbing possibility of all venom. Several small to medium-sized Therocephalians display skull features consistent with venom glands, channels and grooves that may have delivered toxins during a bite. If confirmed, this would make them the earliest known venomous land vertebrates. A bite would not need to be fatal immediately. Shock, paralysis, and internal damage could weaken prey over minutes, turning escape into a slow death. One such candidate is Eushambursia, a dog-sized predator with a skull that suggests specialized venom delivery. Its bite force alone may not have been impressive, but venom would have changed everything. Even larger Therocephalians may have used venom to bring down prey far bigger than themselves, especially juvenile herbivores or weakened adults. In European Russia, another massive predator, Lurkid animal, reached lengths of nearly 3 meters, making it the largest known Therocephalian, a true giant among its Fossilized droppings indicate it fed on large herbivores, possibly Dicynodonts animals, that could weigh hundreds of kilograms. Some studies suggest Megawaitsia also possessed venom glands, potentially delivering lethal doses through repeated bites. The idea remains debated, but even without venom, its size alone made it a terror. With Therocephalians occupying every size class and ecological role, the land became layered with danger. Small predators hunted in burrows and forests, medium predators stalked open ground, large predators dominated floodplain sand. Beneath all of it, the environment itself worked against survival. Heat was constant, shade was rare. Water sources became gathering points for hunters. Every drink was a gamble, every migration a risk. Yet the story does not end here, because reptiles too were evolving, and some of them looked disturbingly familiar. Crocodile-like predators began to appear, slender bodies, elongated snouts, needle-like teeth, the protosuchian relatives, early archosauriforms. Creatures built for both land and water, they were not giants yet, but they were fast, stealthy, and patient. Some hunted on land. Others waded in shallow rivers, ready to strike anything foolish enough to approach. Armored relatives followed, covered in bony plates, protected from attacks by therapsids. These reptiles added yet another layer of threat, especially near freshwater. By now it becomes clear the late Permian land was not dominated by a single predator. It was an ecosystem engineered for killing. Multiple lineages, multiple strategies, multiple ways to die. Compared to this chaos, the oceans remained eerily calm, and there was one place even worse than dry land: fresh water. If the open oceans of the late Permian felt calm, freshwater environments were anything but. Rivers, lakes, and swamps became some of the most dangerous places on the planet. While land predators dominated plains and forests, freshwater was ruled by creatures that hunted silently, ambush predators, ancient forms built to strike without warning. These were not fish. They were amphibians, but nothing like the frogs and salamanders of today. They belonged to a broad group known as temnospondyls, early tetrapods that thrived in the late Permian, some small, some massive, all dangerous. Their bodies resembled giant crocodiles or oversized salamanders. Long torsos, powerful tails, broad flattened skulls. Their eyes were positioned high on their heads, perfect for lurking just beneath the surface, watching, waiting. Many temnospondyls were opportunistic predators. They would eat anything they could overpower. Fish, smaller amphibians, reptiles, even large land animals that ventured too close to the water. One of the most terrifying families among them were the rhinesuchids. These animals dominated freshwater systems in southern Pangaea, especially in what is now South Africa. They were not fast sprinters. They did not need to be. Their strategy was patience or rhinesuchids hid in murky water with only their eyes exposed. When prey approached to drink, they exploded forward, jaws snapping shut with bone-crushing force. The largest among them was Uranocentrodon. Creature reached lengths of over 4 meters, weighing as much as a modern crocodile or more. Its skull alone was massive, broad, heavily reinforced. Once something was grabbed, escape was almost impossible. The prey would be dragged underwater, drowned, and dismembered. Freshwater ecosystems were structured around these ambush hunters. Every river bend, every lake edge, every swamp margin, they controlled access to water. And in a world as hot and dry as the late Permian, water was life itself. This made freshwater one of the most dangerous resources imaginable. But southern Pangaea was not alone. In European Russia, another lineage filled a similar role. The Croniosaucian. These animals were slimmer than rhinesuchids, but no less deadly. Their bodies were elongated, their tails strong, their skulls narrow and streamlined. Some species reached lengths of 3 meters, large enough to attack medium-sized herbivores. And like rhinesuchids, many Croniosaucians were more mobile on land, allowing them to patrol riverbanks and floodplains. She were not restricted to ambush alone. They could pursue prey short distances, dragging victims back into the water. In regions where giant amphibians were absent, these creatures became the dominant freshwater predators. Together, temnospondyls and Croniosaucians turned rivers into killing zones. Animals approaching water faced threats from below, from the shoreline, and from the surrounding land. To drink was to gamble. Many herbivores evolved behaviors to reduce this risk, drinking quickly, approaching in groups, choosing shallow or fast moving streams. Even predators avoided water unless necessary. Freshwater Environments also attracted reptiles. Crocodile-like forms patrolled the same waters, adding competition and additional danger. In some cases, multiple predators shared the same river system. Amphibians, reptiles, therapsidiac, waiting for opportunity. The result was an ecosystem where water itself became a weapon. Compared to this, the open ocean still seemed peaceful. No massive marine reptiles, no giant sharks, no leviathans lurking beneath the waves, just smaller, weakened ecosystems struggling to survive on land and in freshwater. However, evolution had gone too far. Predation was everywhere, danger was layered, escape was rare, and yet despite all of this, life continued. Herbivores, adapted ecosystems persisted, but the balance was fragile and the planet was moving towards something far worse. With predators ruling the land and freshwater, one question becomes unavoidable: how did anything survive at all? The answer lies in adaptation, not speed, not strength, but strategy. Late Permian herbivores did not evolve to outrun death, they evolved to endure it. Across Pangaea, prey animals diversified rapidly, filling niches left behind by extinct lineages. Some became small and elusive. Others became heavily armored. A few chose brute mass as their shield. One of the most successful herbivores of this time was a Lystrosaurus. Animal was not large, roughly the size of a pig or badger, but it was everywhere. Fossils show Lystrosaurus existing in massive numbers across Africa, Asia, and even Antarctica. Its success came from versatility. It had a squat, powerful body, strong forelimbs, and tusk-like beaks. These limbs were not built for fighting predators. They were built for digging. Lystrosaurus created deep burrows, complex underground shelters that provided protection from predators' heat and drought. When danger approached, it disappeared into the earth. When conditions worsened, it waited them out below ground. This behavior alone may have saved it from extinction multiple times, and it was not alone. Completely unrelated groups evolved similar strategies. Elaphils, small barrel-shaped dicynodonts, used their broad skulls like shovels, displacing soil with surprising efficiency. Burrowing became one of the most effective survival tools of the late Permian for animals unable to dig. Another solution, Emergidon piraeus, took this approach to the extreme. These massive herbivores were built like walking fortresses. Their bodies wide and heavy, their bones dense, their skin embedded with bony scutesthi, moved slowly, but they were difficult to kill. The most famous among them was Scutosaurus, found in what is now European Russia. Scutosaurus reached lengths comparable to large predators and weighed over a ton. Its skull was covered in spikes and bosses, its body protected by thick layers of bone and muscle. Attacking such an animal was risky even for the largest Gorgonopsitta. Poorly placed bite could break teeth, damage jaws, or expose a predator to counterattacks. Berets relied on deterrence, not escape. They lived in groups, used size, and trusted their armor to discourage attacks. Other herbivores followed different paths. Captorhinids, parareptiles, and early synapsids diversified into countless forms. Some became fast and agile, others bulky and resilient. Echidnas, in particular, became ecological cornerstones. These animals varied dramatically in size, from small burrowers to massive plant eaters. They dominated herbivore biomass across much of Pangaea, serving as the primary food source for most predators. Yet even they were not helpless. Many dicynodonts had thick skin, powerful neck muscles, and defensive tusks. Some may have charged predators. Others relied on group behavior. Survival depended on awareness. The late Permian world demanded constant vigilance. There were no safe times, no safe places. Predators hunted by day and night, from land, from water, from cover. Herbivores adapted by timing movements, choosing routes carefully, avoiding exposed terrain. Migration patterns shifted. Water sources were approached cautiously. Young were hidden, protected, or born in safer seasons. Even so, death was common. Predation shaped every aspect of behavior, every trait, every decision, and above all of this loomed something even prey could not adapt to: the planet itself. Heat intensified, rainfall declined, deserts expanded, life clustered into shrinking habitable zones. Africa and European Russia became strongholds, not because they were safe, but because everywhere else was worse. The late Permian was not just dangerous, it was exhausting. Every organism lived on the edge of collapse, and this pressure pushed ecosystems toward a breaking point, one that would soon reshape life on Earth forever. Even in a world filled with predators, the late Permian still had one force that dwarfed them all: the planet itself. As Life struggled to survive, evolving deadlier teeth, thicker armor, and smarter behavior. Earth began to change in ways no organism could outrun or fight. Temperatures rose steadily. Average global heat hovered around 35 degrees Celsius. In some regions it climbed far higher. This was not seasonal heat, it was constant, relentless. Large portions of Pangaea became uninhabitable. Vast deserts spread across the equator, so dry and hot that little life could exist. Water evaporated quickly, vegetation thinned. Soil cracked, animals clustered near the few remaining rivers, floodplains, and coastal margins. Competition intensified. Predation increased. The geography of Pangaea made everything worse. A massive mountain chain known as the Central Pangaean Mountains stretched across the supercontinent, blocking moisture from reaching inland regions. Rain fell on one side, while the other baked in permanent drought. This created extreme climate zones. Some areas flooded, others starved. To the north and south conditions varied, but nowhere was truly stable. Storms became violent. Winds intensified. Dust storms swept across open land. Plants struggled to survive. Forests shrank. Open scrubland replaced lush ecosystems. As plant life declined, herbivores suffered. As herbivores declined, predators turned on each other. Cannibalism increased. Competition became lethal. Freshwater systems began to collapse. Rivers dried, lakes shrank, swamps vanished. The ambush predators that once ruled these waters were forced into smaller areas, making encounters more frequent, more violent. Even the oceans began to change. Warmer water held less oxygen. Marine ecosystems, already weakened by extinction, grew thinner. Dead zones expanded. Acidification increased. Life was being squeezed from all sides, yet this was still only the beginning. Beneath what is now Siberia, something catastrophic was building deep within the earth. Immense volumes of magma began to rise. Cracks opened in the crust. Pressure mounted. Then the eruptions began. The Siberian traps, not a single volcano, but thousands. Lava poured across the land in waves, covering millions of square kilometers. Flows reached thicknesses of over a kilometer, consuming everything in their path. Forests burned, rivers boiled, soil vaporized. The eruptions released unimaginable quantities of carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur gases. The atmosphere thickened. The greenhouse effect intensified. Global temperatures spiked. Even higher oxygen levels dropped. Breathing became harder. Hypoxia events spread across land and sea. Acid rain fell for years, stripping leaves from plants, poisoning water sources. The ozone layer was damaged, allowing intense ultraviolet radiation to reach the surface. In some regions, UV exposure may have increased by thousands of percent. Skin burned, eyes damaged, photosynthesis disrupted. Life was no longer just struggling, it was being erased. These conditions did not last days or decades, they persisted for thousands of years. Entire ecosystems collapsed. Predators died, prey died, plants died. Only the hardiest survived. By the time the eruption slowed, the planet was barely recognizable. The world had entered the greatest extinction event in its history, the Great Dying. When the eruptions finally slowed, the world that remained was almost empty. Life on Earth had been reduced to shadows of what it once was. More than 90% of marine species were gone. Nearly 70% of land vertebrates vanished. Forests that once covered continents no longer existed. What remained were scattered patches of hardy plants clinging to survival. The land was silent. No great herds moved across plains. No apex predators ruled territories. Food chains had collapsed from the top and the bottom. At the same time, oxygen levels were lower than at any other point in complex life history. Breathing itself demanded more energy for animals that relied on speed, strength, or size. Survival was nearly impossible. Smaller, simpler creatures had an advantage. Burrowing animals fared better. Those that could hide underground escaped the worst heat, radiation, and oxygen. Lost creatures with slow metabolisms endured longer. Those able to eat almost anything survived. Where specialists failed, reptile like synapsids that once dominated the land were nearly wiped out. Only a few lineages endured. Small, unremarkable, often overlooked, but these survivors carried something powerful. Time the oceans told a similar story. Marine life was devastated. Coral reefs disappeared entirely. For millions of years, no true reefs existed. The seas became dominated by bacteria and algae. Large predators were gone, yet water provided stability that land could not. Temperatures fluctuated less. Radiation penetration was Weaker oxygen, though low, was more consistent life, slowly returned to the ocean's first simple organisms spread, then small fish. Then new predators on land. Recovery was painfully slow. Soil had been stripped away, nutrients were scarce, rainfall patterns were unstable. Every ecosystem had to rebuild from nothing. This was not a return to the old world, it was a reset. The creatures that emerged afterward were different. They were faster, more efficient, more adaptable. Among them were early ancestors of dinosaurs, small, bipedal hunters that thrived in unstable environments. They did not inherit the earth, they earned it. The Permian world never came back, but from its destruction a new age began, the Triassican era, born from fire, suffocation, and silence. The lesson of the great dying is simple. Life is resilient, but it is not invincible when the planet turns against it. Only those that adapt without hesitation survive. Everything else becomes history.